Here.
Mr. Hoffman,
Here.
Mr. Updike,
Here.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Here.
Mr. Anderson.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Moving on to approval of the agenda.
So move.
Second. It's moved and seconded for approval of the agenda. Any questions or comments? Rachel, please collect the vote.
Mr. Ewing,
Yes.
Mrs. Sealing,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Updike,
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Milius.
Yes.
Approved.
Very good. Thank you. Moving on to our one and only discussion item this evening is a discussion of policy IF and policy IFA. Dr. Link, would you like to, according to our policy on policies, the superintendent can provide an update or a progression of the amendments and edits to the policy and your recommendations.
Yes, as I think everyone should be aware is that, like I said, we currently in board policy, there is policy IF, which covers both textbooks as instructional materials and media center materials all in under one umbrella. And again, when I really looked at that policy in depth, parts of it are clear, parts of it were not clear, because when you start thinking about textbooks and all the courses, you start thinking about instructional materials, you start thinking about media center materials, it's very, very quite encompassing and does raise questions at times in terms of, okay, what would qualify as this that would need to come to the board? What might qualify as this that would need to have maybe just discretion at the building level by the principal? And so we sat down and I visited with some, first with our administrative team, then I visited it. Again, we had a couple of members of the board that, also looked at this, and we determined, and also in visiting with, our legal representation of what might be the best way to do this. And it was decided that we would be best to maybe keep policy IF and make it in two different compartments. A policy IF that would deal strictly with the textbooks and instructional materials, and then a policy or another compartment of that, which would be IFA, that would deal strictly with the media center materials. The other piece of both of these that's critical is once agreement is made upon the premise of IF as well as the premise on IFA, the key ingredient, and I referenced this it's been several weeks now at a prior meeting when we were talking, and I said at the time that we definitely, one thing in the policy that I was unable to find any record of that is important is once these are agreed upon, said very clearly that the superintendent shall establish guidelines for both the selection of textbooks, instructional materials, and media center materials that would align with whatever verbiage is decided upon for policy IF and policy IFA. Our administrative team internally has, like I said, been looking at this, for several weeks, trying to determine what might be the best way to go. But more importantly, we have kind of started looking at drafting in terms of what might, actual guidelines look like. And we're keeping that kind of open because we want to make sure that we address once the board gives us some direction on what they're happy with policy wise, but it's the actual guidelines that are developed for each of those two components that will definitely guide us and answer a lot of questions that our everyday staff, teachers, assistant principals, instructional coaches, coordinators, directors, would all have about in helping determine to make sure that the key materials, whether it's a textbook, whether it's a workbook, actually goes through the proper channels that it needs to make sure that we do not have any missteps along the way that we all look back and say "That should not have happened." The other thing that I want to kind of point out in this policy IF and IFA that I think, because not all of us are really able to look at words and really make a lot of sense out of it. And one of the things that came up the last meeting that we had was maybe we could put together for policy IF, the time we know we were going to have an IFA, but also maybe put together some type of a flow chart that might outline the processes based upon how policy IF or IFA would flow. And so I think, I don't know if you were given that as a resource, but it was uploaded to the actual document for you to look at that also kind of has a flow chart there that kind of outlines the entire processes for, especially when it comes to, textbooks and instructional materials. But if you look at the first one there on policy IF, the textbooks and instructional materials, and you look there, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can look in red there and see what was stricken from the actual original verbiage and what was inserted. Again, it's not a lot of change. It just kind of keeps it in its own lane. And then also it does address, because this came up in discussion as well, the part that we would also in the past, it hasn't not been real clear when it comes to a pilot. And it does, outline actually in the policy, that also the Board of Education will be informed and weigh in on any type of a pilot that might be looking at being pursued before making a final decision on a major instructional purchase that might span a grade span of like a K-5 or a 6 through 12, or even in some instances it could be a K-12 approach. We have had some verbiage for pilots, but not in the policy. I know that there have been some pilots in the past where, again, that there was notification, to parents, but I'm sure there's also been in the times past where, again, the pilot piece has not always been as concrete. And so that would address it in the policy as well. And that is also referenced quite pointedly in the flow chart there as well. They also say, the one thing that I think it says the textbooks and instructional materials shall support which remained the district's instructional program. And then I said, the green there, along with supporting the district's core values, which again keeps at the forefront there, that individuals need to be cognizant, of our school district. Every school district is of its own. Every school district has its own boundaries. And while we all have the same end result with our overarching goals of what we want to accomplish, that's the one thing about education. It's more of there's more than one ways to go about accomplishing what you need to accomplish. And you don't have to have a cookie cutter approach just because every other district might do it a certain way. You can have the autonomy to do that. But we did put that in there. And then it also listed, which again is the same as was in there, the selection criteria of what the components should, the key components that should be present in terms of having they should provide an effective education, factual knowledge, ability for students to engage and hone their skill, and also develop, an appreciation for a wide range of aspects that would provide a lot of balanced views, as well as also weighing in that there is flexibility in the selection materials to make sure that it does meet a wide span of ability levels, because again, we have everything, student populations from, the very high level gifted spectrum to, sometimes those that do, learn at a little bit, might at a slower pace and have some challenges that would impact, their learning. But again, that also component there was definitely not anything that is a new component for that. And then, as I said down there, it also does incorporate a couple new areas when it comes to when we do have at the school level, is when we do have a wide range of curriculum for like a K-5 span, like when it might be teaching in math, or when it might be teaching reading, or it might be doing social studies. You do have that wide spectrum, and you may occasionally, because there are a lot of different lessons when you're talking 170 some day school year, and you've got 5 different grade spans, that's going to potentially could be 400 or 500 different lessons easily in one particular subject for that particular grade span over the course of a year. And so it does talk there about, again, if you have come across a lesson, teacher comes across a lesson, or a parent comes across a lesson within curriculum where they just feel, hey, I really have some reservations about this, and what that process is, which we have in place now, where there can be conversations between the teacher, the principal, to determine, okay, what might be an appropriate alternative, to that particular assignment once they work out, okay, what is the part that they find definitely that they feel there's a need for an alternative to, but it outlines that process as well. And then, but other than that, it pretty much stayed the same. And that's pretty much the one that we did focus on. We have focused on the instructional materials and textbooks, because that's where, again, prompted this. But at the same time, we also did go in and look at the Media Center materials. I will say that this one we have not had internally a lot of time yet to get a lot of feedback on this particular one, in terms of as we would go in and establish our guidelines and work with our Media Center personnel, on this, which we would definitely, want to do. But we want to at least get your eyes on this so you could give us some direction. And then we would ideally be able to take this and take it to other individuals as well, especially our Media Center specialists, so that they would be able to offer input, on that as well. But again, this pretty much not a lot of new, is because again, it's merging what was under the textbooks and instructional materials. But the main thing to keep in mind with this one, we would also, just as we would have for policy IF, a complete guidelines that would be established that would spell out particularly, what the process is that's utilized for the selection of those thousands of materials, as well as, whenever you do, there might be, which we have had in place, if you find an individual that might find, an item in the library collection that's, they might find, something that, hey, maybe we need to get some more information on why this is here, outlines that process. I do want to say also that I do think it would be very wise moving forward in the light of a lot of the discussions we've had over the past few months, in that I think moving forward, for instance, when we talk about the Media Center material, I think it would be wise. And I've, talked with our Media Center specialist and had some good conversations with them. Perhaps, sometime in the near future, we should probably maybe ask our media specialist to come into a future board meeting and just present on, they would love, I'm sure, to have that opportunity just to present on how they go about it, and answer any questions that you might have. Same way with our staff. I do also believe, again, that day in and day out, our staff, as you all well know, I'm preaching to the choir, know that our staff are very talented. They're very dedicated. They take their role very seriously of working with each and every kid. But I do think that the curriculum materials that they use and the activities that they use each and every day to support that curriculum are truly done and designed in a way that they know is going to make an impact. And unfortunately, when we do have these large curriculum series that do encompass large grade spans that are designed for the masses, so to speak, across the country. We are occasionally going to find a lesson. You may find a lesson that again does have some questions raised about it. And I think that's what we have in our policy design, what that process is. But I think what I'm saying is that like recently, I know there's been some questions about the CKLA curriculum that the board approved last December. That was a big purchase. Reading is always a big decision. Okay. And I think that now that we have had that in our schools for a semester, almost a semester, I think it might be wise that as soon as we could in the near future, I think our teachers, our principals would welcome the opportunity to come in and maybe share with you what they've seen in that, what they're noticing so far, what may have been the pros, some of the challenges, but also allow our Board of Education, each of you, maybe even beforehand, to submit questions that you may have and allow them the opportunity to weigh in. Because I will say that I wish I could say here that every particular curriculum that's out there that's designed is perfect, but again, it's not. But you do have to still weigh through what's going to best fit your local needs and the areas that you find that might not be the best. It's then where you have to put your talented minds together and come up with alternatives that, but again, those should be for the most part not the large scale. It should be that very rare exception. So that's kind of what I have, Mr. President, on the policy IF and IFA. Like I said, the key work will come is once there's some agreement on how these should look like, that's when we'll start in and can bring back the actual guidelines for each of those two areas. We do have a good start on the guidelines with the textbooks, instructional materials. The media center materials, like I said, in that discussion is we've had it, but we still got more work to do on that to get that in a form that we could probably get back to you. And I know I talked too much.
Well, you open it up we'll open it up for discussion with board members on the edits and changes. Just a quick review is that the policy IF was split into two policies. One IF is for textbooks and instructional materials. IFA is for media center materials. Beyond that, you can see the red text is there's two different sets of comments within here. The red text changes and the green text changes. I think it was an amalgamation of a couple of different groups looking at this, but nonetheless, it's at this point we need to have feedback and conversation with the board on their thoughts on. Let's start with policy IF. Any feedback, comments?
I have a question. On page 1 in the second paragraph, it's green, so it's an addition. It says, as part of the selection process, the board will be advised of any textbook materials that pertain to a pilot program, if possible. What do you guys see as instances where it would be if possible? Why wouldn't it always be?
I would think it'd be okay just to not
Delete
put
it.
the if possible, because you could be informed by email or unless somebody has some good reason. I don't see why the if possible is needed in there. Do you?
That was exactly my question. I circled the words if possible, wondering why that was in there.
Strike.
So
When it provides the clarity of direction.
So I did review them at home too, and then again today, and it doesn't. So kudos to the initial policy writer back in 2015. It doesn't look like we really changed much of anything except for pulling out the media center. That's what most of the red strike through is that and I think that's fine to separate those out, the media center. So the first green would be the change, but the one that Nicole just read about the selection process. And I do think that it's good to have that pertain to a pilot program in there. I mean, it actually was presented to us December 12th, the new elementary curriculum that did have 27 pilot teachers. And so we have been doing that 5 principals, 5 instructional coaches, a special educator. So we have had that, but I think it is good to add it into the policy. So another thing that I questioned on page 2 is the words, information which students develop an appreciation of American culture, ethnic and racial diversity, and balanced views concerning international, national, state, and local issues and problems. The word balanced views, how are we defining balanced views? Who's deciding what is the balanced view?
What's your suggestion, Ellie?
Well,
This is the
was looking for
conversation to move
clarity.
it forward.
Right.
What would you suggest to provide clarity around that?
I think we need to further define what a balanced view is and who is going to be the one that decides what the balanced view is.
Okay, and how would you define that? As far as what would your suggestion or recommendation be?
I'm not sure. Before the next meeting when we vote on it, I can definitely think that through.
Yeah.
I'm open to suggestion.
And this is, has everybody found it? It's on the top of page 2. Okay. All right, so Dr. Luttrell, I guess that would be direction to provide
Yes,
some
we
clarification.
can definitely come up with the definition for that. It's like I said, I forget where just last week, sometime recently, I had a discussion with some members of our team and we were talking about how it is very important that you don't think you may not view it as a big deal, but there are, again, especially in the areas of social sciences, that how one views some recent events. I mean, it does make a difference. And that's why I think it is important that that's where I think it goes back where you have to try to, sometimes you may be able to teach a concept if you're trying to teach, for instance, a person that, about how to make your voice heard. I think you got to be very careful sometimes. Okay, how do you go about what examples you use for that to make sure that you just don't use one that might be right at the forefront and center for you, that you have to kind of, is that likely or not likely to kind of cause some, consternation. But that goes back where I think that's something that we have to, again, ideally, definitely hone that part in on our staff and then trust that they will use their talents, keeping that mindset in of, okay, our local community, our standards, what do we think is going to be the best approach that's going to still get that skill across without upsetting.
No, I mean, I think just providing a suggested definition, and I think board members.
And we can do that.
If you have thoughts on what that definition might include, you could certainly email
mind,
Dr. Luttrell.
The statement that it replaced in the original policy was books and other media materials shall be evaluated before purchase, either through direct examination or by using reputable, unbiased, professionally prepared selection tools.
Oh, so that's
that
different than
replaced.
what we're looking at. That's not in our red line.
No.
No, this is the original
Oh,
policy.
I'm sorry.
It was
I thought
taken
you meant
from
on here.
the
That's the
original.
IFA part.
Yeah,
Right?
Yeah, you're looking at a different part.
You're looking at the IFA instead of the,
I'm looking at the original policy.
Right.
Yeah,
The
I
original
printed it.
policy.
Yeah.
Here it is. Just above it, you're looking at the selection criteria media center materials. If you look up in the original policy, selection criteria textbooks.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Right on.
There you go.
Yep, gotcha. And that's now moved to
Yes.
just IFA, which
IFA.
just is going to pertain to
That was all-
media. So do we want that part to just pertain to media, or is that should it be pertaining
It
to all?
only pertained to media in the first.
Okay,
Yeah, in the original policy, right? I've got that right, Sharon.
Mhm.
It applied to the media center materials.
yeah, books and I see books and other media materials shall be evaluated before purchase. Okay, above that, where that dotted line is, it's bolded, the superintendent shall develop selection procedures which meet the above criteria, which shall include a review of available material by appropriate staff members. Is that bolded for a reason, or are we drawing attention for, or is that?
I think I am not sure, but I would bet that I voted that probably because I want to make sure, because I knew that right now I wasn't able to find that anywhere, and that was a missing piece that is crucial in and of itself, I think, to keep a lot of.
So but it was happening because it did just happen with the elementary school, like I said, so it's not a new thing that's happening.
No, it's not new, but
Okay.
it wasn't, it's not brand new, but it's bolded there, I think, just.
Okay. In the section of challenges of textbooks or other instructional materials, still looking at just IF. It appears that the board is not made aware until it goes up through the chain. And I am struggling with that one because not that the board should, I understand the chain of command, but as I understand the chain of command and do appreciate and respect it, the community is above the Board of Education. So I struggle with if a community member comes to me and says, I have issues with this and we aren't made aware. So I think that the board just needs to be made aware if something is being challenged. That doesn't mean we have to act on it because it can follow the process, but something in the policy that says the board will be made aware.
I had that in my notes too, something to add to it, some verbiage. It says when there is a review committee assembled, there'll be a notification sent to the board.
I don't want to be any board member blindsided by that, feeling like I didn't know that there was an issue or concern.
Are we talking about one a semester or one a day? I mean, is this something that happens very often, or?
Well, that's a good question. Is there often? Have you had
It
many
doesn't.
people in the last year and a half?
In the last year and a half, no.
Okay.
The next.
I mean, there have been, like I said, but there have been some just general questions here recently. Like I said about, like, for instance, there's been some questions about just not in the actual media, but like for with like the CKLA, hey, I'm hearing there might be some lessons here and there that nothing to the level of a formal challenge. Because again, on things like that, we do want to, I think the emphasis is to try as best we can to encourage to be some initial dialogue at the lowest level. And then if that doesn't work out and that's when I think I need to at least, hey, there might be we've got this going on. We're still trying to work it out, but in case you hear,
My suggestion was to add that to both IF and IFA.
Me too.
Under the challenges part, just that the board would be informed of any current.
When a
challenge.
review committee is assembled, not necessarily a challenge, but when it moves to the point of a review committee.
Okay.
Well, and so this is under the challenge part where it talks about like who will be, which it follows with what we've done, but I do like that it's lined out. But that is just the challenge part. I don't know that it lines out before that of just new material of who will be a part of the selection committee. It lines out who will be a part of the review committee if there's a challenge, but it doesn't line out who will be a part of the review committee as new material.
Right.
Correct? Yeah. Is it the same?
No, I don't
No.
think so. That's where the superintendent
and that's where.
develops the selection.
That is
procedure.
where ideally, once we're able to kind of develop and kind of start really intense work on the procedures for selection of and there it would outline who would be involved in terms of who might be involved in that.
Okay, that's a work in progress.
Yeah,
right?
it's
Okay.
very rough work in progress. And this is just the one on the instructional material piece, not the library
Okay.
piece.
Backing up, I meant to also just where it says all textbooks and instructional materials shall be subject to board approval. Instructional materials. What do we mean by that? Do we mean handouts, worksheets, magazines, like what? I'm not sure what all is included in that.
And that is that goes back again to definitions, and that goes back to, again, whenever we get this piece here, for you all to look, it does, and here we starts out with pretty much definitions of what we define, what would be defined as a supplementary material, what would be like instructional materials would be broken down into core curriculum, supplementary materials, teacher materials, define each.
Okay.
And there's a selection process because this would kind of be the handbook
Okay.
that, again, that our staff and our principals and would all use kind of to make sure that we're trying to keep it in compliance and align with.
So this document needs to be referenced in the policy as. where you
Yes,
can find-
and in fact, on this draft that I added today, even after I work, that this needs to be modified to make sure it aligns with
Mhm.
whatever we come up with on IF and IF.
Okay.
I had one more question. Sorry, Ally.
No, you're
It was kind of in regards to, and it may fall into this other policy you're talking about. During your comments, Dr. Luttrell, you said that there would be kind of guidelines for teachers as they go through lessons and they find it maybe doesn't fit into what we're teaching, that they'd have kind of a flow where they could have it reviewed. Is that going to be in what you provide us?
It's outlined it's outlined in the policy that just says, that again, that there's that for complaints or you can do that. But ideally, how that would be addressed would be in this piece here. It would be a component that basically when a principal or a teacher, mainly a principal, gets that initial, hey, like to talk to you about this particular, they could then pull this piece out here. And there would be a section in here that would kind of more clearly define and walk them through, okay, here's typically, and like I said, I know Dr. Smith and Dr. Robinson and we've had some initial discussions about, again, we do think that there needs, because the key thing is too, we got to ensure that whenever there is if you have a parent at one elementary school that says, hey, could we have an alternative assignment? Because I really just don't know if I'm comfortable with this particular individual lesson. And then, so the principal and the parent work that, principal, the teacher and the parent all work through that. And they get alternative. And then let's hypothetically state that another parent in another elementary school kind of has this, we want to make sure that there's consistency between, what was done for both, so that it's one of them gets, really, and the other one kind of, that there's kind of some form of a alternative would one of these three be appropriate? Would you be comfortable with?
I understand that. So I think my question is, in our current policy that we have, it only allows students and parent legal guardians of the student to challenge materials per the policy.
Does it say that? I'm sorry.
It says challenges of textbooks, any student or parent legal guardian of a student. So my question is, you had mentioned a process for teachers if they felt like something was not following this. Where will do they fall into this if they're not a parent or a student? What can they follow? Can we add it to this?
I think that would probably be wise, yes, to add, because if I follow what you're saying, I think you would want to include, because again, if we have our own teachers and staff that we rely on that help us develop our curriculum, develop our activities, especially as every year those individuals change, and we may bring on some new individual staff members, and they might have a different set of eyes, the way they look at things, and they might say, hey, this lesson here, have you all ever thought? So I think I don't think that's clearly spelled out in this piece yet, but I think that'd be wise to add so that those people, again, that especially our staff have a voice, and hey, here's where I think we might be able to enhance this. But it's just not locked in.
So as one elementary sees a lesson plan that they don't love, and they decide to remove that from their lessons, is it possible to add communication to the other elementaries, or will that be part of the process so that we're consistent?
That's a good question. I mean, that's something that I think I definitely collective minds with our principals, talking to them about, hey, this came up, what are your thoughts? And let them help us kind of guide, because again, they want to definitely, we all want to make the process, just as you do, that it's a win-win for everybody. You know, that it is something that anyone feels they can come and express their thoughts, and that there can be positive dialogue. That, because in the end, rather than just saying you're wrong, we're right, that's not going to get anybody.
So the edit that you're suggesting, Nicole, is on what, page 2 under challenges of textbooks and other instructional?
Well, I wasn't sure if that we should be changing those first student or legal guardian, or if he would be adding it to his handbook, which is kind of what he's saying, because I feel like that process looks different for a teacher and administration than it does for our parents.
So what I think what she's saying is, what should be, as far as we can address it in the handbook, but I think in this particular, what I think would work and address what Director Mace is saying would be if we just maybe put any student, comma, parent/legal guardian of a student, comma, or staff member currently employed in the district can, in other words, make sure that way at least they're mentioning that they're included as having a possible voice.
I think everybody should have a voice. I mean, our taxpayers, it could be a grandparents. I mean, everybody should have the opportunity to review what they paid for. So my other clarification and differences between this one and pulling out the media. Well, first, let me say, I do think that the handbook needs to be referenced in the policy, but the other, removing challenged materials. So in IF, it's lined out that challenged materials shall not be removed for use during the review period. But in IFA, it is still in there. So are we saying that if it will be removed from like curriculum, classroom materials, and IF?
I think that's a legal
I think that was
Okay.
a legal.
issue. Mr. Goheen, can you?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a different legal standard that applies to library materials that the courts have applied a little bit of a different legal standard to library materials than they have to curriculum materials. So the Board of Education and administration have a greater right or ability to remove a challenged material from curriculum, because curriculum is given to a captive audience by teachers as part of the daily class exercise. So the courts have recognized that administration has the right to sort of pull a material that's being challenged or reviewed immediately in that context. In the context of public libraries and school libraries, typically if the challenge material is pulled during the challenge period, the courts have struck that down. So this language actually comes from KASB. It's not my language, but that's the reason that language exists. And so when we split the two policies into one for the library materials and one for the school materials, we left the language in that KASB had for challenge materials staying in place during the challenge period. And that's just to be able to defend easier if there's a court challenge to the removal while the selection process takes place. I have seen districts place it on like a reserve list or something where you have to have some restriction on being able to check it out, but outright removing it will draw a lawsuit. Okay. So that's why that's differentiated.
So I think I only had two other things before moving completely to IFA. The board review and action. So we already determined that early on the board should be made aware. Transparently, it should be made aware in a public meeting. So that the community knows that there's potential issue. Because obviously we have nothing to hide. The other thing that in this board review and action where it says the complainant can appeal the superintendent's decision in writing to the school board president or vice president. I don't know why it would be that they could only appeal to the president and vice president when we, as board members, are selected by the people. I think it should just say in writing to the school board within 15 days.
I think the intent of the way this was written was to get it to board leadership so they could communicate it to the rest of the board via the clerk, the board clerk, I think.
Well, and so maybe it goes to the board clerk and the board clerk could send it out, but I just don't want to send the message to the community that they can't contact their elected board member. And then I do appreciate how, and some of you have worked on these policies for years, so thank you. It's not easy work. 20 years in, no. I do like when I'm trying to find policy, when policy relates, like if it references another policy, that's very helpful. And a lot of times at the bottom of our policies, it'll say all those letters, but at least then you know where to find something that is in relation to it. So I think that the only thing that we would need, and Nels, you might know, where's the policy that we could connect this to, that if this policy isn't followed, then what happens? I think you said there was a policy on that. Possibly.
There's a policy that connects this on all policies.
Yeah.
No, not that one. Well, there is CM and there's also,
Did you say CM?
CBDM or something like that. GBGA.
GBGA.
So at the very beginning, there's a cross references section that we could, I think, probably do need to add in appropriate cross-reference policies.
Okay.
At least review that and make sure it's accurate.
So we would cross-reference, I think you said CM and GBGA, so we can go and look those up.
Yeah, just need to verify those are the correct policies.
Yeah, I've got.
Okay.
Any comments?
This might be a legal question, Greg. So moving over to IFA, I'm sorry, was everybody done with IF? I don't mean to move along. Good.
Just to review, just real quick,
Okay.
I had 6 changes. One is to add in or delete the if possible in the first section. That's the first action. Second action is add a definition of balanced views, or at least reference where that definition might be found. We've asked Dr. Luttrell to provide a suggested definition, and then we can certainly on our own develop a definition or provide some guidance there. The third thing is to add that the board is informed when a review committee is formed. Fourth is action is reference the workflow and the selection procedures. That's this document that they're within the policy.
The handbook, so to speak, right?
Pardon me?
The handbook, so to speak.
Yeah, handbook.
Okay.
What are they calling it?
I don't know.
What are you calling it, Dr. Luttrell?
Both guidelines handbook.
I'll just put in quotations and you can add in the title that we have. That's the fifth is to change the challenges of textbooks or other instructional materials, add in or staff member. The sixth was review and add the additional cross-reference policies. Those are the comments and feedback we have. Anything else?
Yeah, one between IF and IFA on the selection review committee.
Mm-hmm.
One has includes a student and one does not. So we
We talked about that.
talked about maybe not including a student on either. IF still shows that.
Yeah,
That was right.
IF still shows that, so that would be
We would,
for agreeable, that's it's top of page 3. Is the,
take out the one, scratch the one student.
yeah, composition of the review committee, this composition, it would be to delete and one student if they're requested for the review for review purposes that the material is inappropriate for minors, a student representative may be left off the committee, and that's to strike that. That's the 7th edit.
Andy or Rachel, would you mind pulling those policies that we're gonna reference and sending those to us? I don't know,
I'm sorry, what?
the the referenced policies, GA,
GBGA
all those initials, GBGA, CM.
website.
Yeah, they're on.
They're on the
board
web, they're on board docs.
Okay. I'll just want to review them today.
Nicole, any other comments? Okay, Keith, any comments? All right. Ally, any further comments
Not on
on IF? Brent?
I'm glad the original sentence is still there.
Mhm.
All textbooks and instructional materials shall be subject to board approval.
Right.
That's number 1.
And Sharon?
No, I just wanted to see if there's a consensus that we can bring these back in December for
With these,
approval. That one,
with
this
these-
one that we've talked about so far with these edits, if people will be comfortable with that. Does
yes.
anybody see a problem with it or?
We
All
can,
right.
can we vote to
No.
approve it at next meeting,
Any other?
possibly? You
Well-
send them out to us, right?
Will we have the handbook piece to approve with it as well?
I
I think I think we could have a draft. I mean, the thing is that you're wanting to, I mean, we definitely would have a draft of the instruct for IF. Okay, I just can't guarantee we're getting close, the media center one, which would be similar. I mean, we haven't really, I don't want to, we would do our best, but I mean, I just know that's going to take, I want to get some feedback from our media center specialists and
Yeah.
different ones. And I just, we're talking,
Yeah, I don't know that we really need to have that to approve the policy because we'll have that come when it's ready to approve like a handbook, the whole document and, right?
I agree.
That's what I was thinking as well. If we approve this, then can we make sure it's included in our normal policy review in, what is that, June, July? Can we make sure
oh,
this
mean
comes
like-
back with the handbook as well, so we can approve it then as
Yeah,
well?
that would make sense to do it with other handbook.
yeah, definitely. That.
Very good. Nels, did you have any additional
Yeah.
comments? All right, very good. We'll move on to policy IFA. And I think Dr. Luttrell's given us an overview, but again, you can see red text and green text of edits and changes, and this is specific to media center materials. So pulling them apart. I guess first, do we all agree that pulling them apart is the thing to do? It seems like the right thing. It seems like very different topics, so.
Sounds like a legal issue too, so.
Right, and
satisfy
I think
some
it
of the legal
provides
issue.
clarity around that,
Mhm.
you know, that
Yeah.
it's separate, okay?
I mean, there's really not a lot of change except for pulling them out, but
No.
I think it helped to it. Thank you, Greg, for
Well,
explaining
we
that.
felt it was important to specifically reference the district's core values. Felt like it was important to pull that specific reference in and,
The only couple suggestions, so again, I like the cross references, I think that's helpful. When we're talking about media center materials, I suppose that the definition of that again, like what are we talking about? What does that mean? And does that mean, and maybe it doesn't, but does that mean like online references? Because we do have policy, Phil would probably know where that's at, do have policy that students can't just be out there Googling anything and everything. Like we have firewalls and we have, I don't know the technology, the IT terms, but they can't just be I mean, that comment's been made a lot lately, that students can go and access whatever they want online. Well, no, they can't, not from our school. Not at school, they can't. So I don't know if we reference that policy there, just to, like, if there was a parent that was looking this up, was wondering if we are inappropriately exposing their children, that we're not at the school, because there's policy that says that we do not allow inappropriate content from their MacBooks and, you know, school materials. So maybe in reference to. And this might, maybe this is a legal question, but I wondered if in this policy, it should reference where material, like where our list of approved materials is, like what, Greg, is there any reason that we can't have a link to what all has been approved in books or whatever? I feel like that would maybe save time. When a parent has a question, if a book is available, if they could just access the list, they could see for themselves.
So it's been a while since I've looked for a library book in the school library, and I kind of harken back to the Dewey Decimal System and the little card
The
books.
card
right?
catalog. Yeah.
My guess is that it would be completely impractical to try to do that in your policy, or even in a procedure book. So I think you would almost have to default to, I assume that when the kids are looking for materials in the media, the library areas in the different school buildings, that they have access to some virtual way of doing that. I assume the parents have access to that too, but I don't think you're going to be able to like give every parent a list every year of all the books that are in the school library. I think that's probably not going to be practical.
I wondered that too. I asked one of the principals, and they had said that they do have a list because they approve purchase of everything. So it's all on the.
I think the approved purchase though is like when they buy like a set of materials. If I'm understanding right, I think what they buy are like a pre-packaged group of materials, but they're not replacing what's currently in the library each year. So I think it's like you'd have to get a report from your media specialist in the purchasing way they do that. But my familiarity with the process from other districts is that they go out and they select a grouping of published materials that are suggested by a publisher to put into the library to sort of refresh materials that are in there already, replace materials that are worn out, those types of things. And then those go into the library or sort of put out there for circulation. But somewhere there exists a list of everything that's in the library.
I would think it's easier.
But my guess is that that's not going to be something that is easy for principals to print out and hand out, and that it's going to be voluminous if they did. So I don't think that's something you want to get in the habit of doing. My suggestion would be that just like the kids have access to looking at what those materials are in the library, that the parents should have the same access.
And so maybe that's the part of the policy is that
I think that's how I
parents
do
and
it.
people have access to what is in the library.
Yeah, I think that would be the way you would do it, not to check the materials out necessarily, because you want to make sure they're available for your students. It's not a public library, but that the parents would be able to look and see what materials are, available for checkout in the school libraries. I think that seems perfectly permissible.
Okay, so somehow adding that to the policy.
Do what now? It's got to be a little bit more.
Okay, so that
clear than that.
it's policy that parent, staff, to go back to our previous conversation, staff, constituents, whoever could look and see what is of it. If they have something of a concern, they can go and they can ask. And then the only other thing on this is, again, kind of some of the same edits that we had in IF, making sure that the handbook is referenced, that making sure that a lot of the same things, making sure that the board is made aware if there is a complaint, concern, So those clarification things, if they might be in both.
Yeah, adding teachers and staff to the challenges of materials
Mhm.
on this IFA, just as we did with IF.
I think, and I might just throw this out as just a thought question for the board on that. Your staff probably have a different avenue to complain about materials than your the parents or the students do. So I'm not sure you certainly can do it. And you mentioned this when you talked about.
I absolutely agree with you. I think it should be in that.
I think staff maybe have a different avenue to voice concerns or complaints sort of up the chain of command a little bit differently. But if you want it in the policy, that's fine too. I just throw that out there as that tends to be a little bit different process. If it's a teacher saying, hey, I don't think this material is appropriate, that kind of goes a different way typically.
Well, you would hope it wouldn't get to the challenge level,
Right.
right? That if there's a difference in a opinion of a staff member, that would be settled before it got to like a challenge.
That would typically be more of a just a normal administrative process of having those things vetted out at that level. But if you want it in the policy, that's fine. I'm just pointing that out because you mentioned it earlier and I was sitting down, so I didn't want to.
No, I appreciate that. I agree with that 100% because I feel like the process for teachers' concerns regarding a lesson or whatever looks different and the process looks different. It's not going to look like this. So if we're going to actually hold people accountable for this, it needs to be how we're going to practice it. So if staff and teachers their process is different, it needs to be laid out and spelled out in that different process. I agree with that. I'm not sure what that looks like over with Dr. Luttrell.
As long as the teachers feel comfortable escalating it up too. I mean, I wouldn't want to pigeonhole them into that. If they want to bring something to the board, they should be able to.
Right. I think it's just a slightly different process. I'm not sure, for example, you need a selection committee to review a disagreement between two staff members over whether a particular material is appropriate. I think that maybe is a administrative decision for your building principal and or perhaps your administrators, still subject to coming up to the board. But I don't know that you need that extra committee review if it's just an employee that's got a concern about something. It seems to be a different complaint to me. But again, if you want it all in the same funnel, that's board's discretion. I just know as a typical matter, what happens if you have staff members that have a disagreement, that's usually resolved through the administrative channel, could still come up to the board if there's a continued dispute, but that's a little bit different than a challenge to material that maybe has nothing to do with the particular teacher involved. So that's just food for thought. It's not illegal.
So just to kind of finish up part of the conversation too, I think, Keith, were you just saying something about we had asked for the list to be?
I thought we had talked about that a while back about making the library books available, the list of what we have available. I thought that came up. Time's not a good friend of mine. I don't remember when, but
No, that has come up before and it's even surfaced recently. I've had some question and there are ways, like I said, currently the way our current parent portal is set up, for a parent to go on and check grades and different things, there's another avenue where they can go in through the portal and the library platform for books and materials that are in the library, especially books that are available for circulation. That platform is Destiny. All of our libraries use the Destiny software. Any parent that has a child enrolled in the district and attends a particular school, they can, through their username that they already have, go in and search. And now, when they say search, they can enter a title, like they have a question about a particular title. They can go in and enter that title and it will return whether that book is in circulation there at that particular school. What is not allowed currently, but again, is open for discussion. I've had this request recently. I've talked with our media specialist very informally about it, no decision, but currently what is not permissible and it's just because of the way it's set up where we allow the parents access to allow them to do for the schools for which their children are enrolled. They're unable to use that unless we give it to them. If they ask, we will give it, but they can't not currently set up where their access code that they get for the parent portal to go in and search Destiny. They can only do it at the schools where they have a child enrolled. Now there are, and I haven't checked in to see how it works, but there are school districts out there that just have a searchable database that for any parent anywhere, you don't necessarily even have to be in the district. Now there's some things you want to consider with that, but still, there are some districts that will incorporate just a database where again, it's not where you just say, I want to know everything. You have to put in and know what title you're looking for, what the material is, and it'll automatically tell you, spit back out, yes, it's here. And it'll kind of tell you where in the district you might find that. Again, we're not set up there for that yet. Again, as I've said, that those are kinds of conversations that we need to continue to have and work forward with our media specialists to reach what we feel is going to be best, for all of our key patrons and stakeholders.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, we're not set up to do that yet, but the plan is to potentially do that.
The discussion is underway.
Okay.
No, right now, it's not saying that we would have anybody could go on and search come February 1. We haven't got that far yet.
Okay.
But they can go on through Destiny. We have been, if a parent did come and right now, since we're not set up for them to move platforms just automatically, if they did call and talk to their school principal, librarian, or whatever, we can get that person set up to where they could use the same login and using it for every, they still would have to go to each library, but they would be able to get in. Okay. But we need to continue to have discussions in the weeks and months ahead as we draft out further guidelines on just what's going to be the best method. Because again, there's a lot of ways to look at that. And we need to definitely consider our people that are right at the front lines of that with our media specialists who, again, they definitely, like all of us make critical decisions every day, and we want to make sure that we include their voice on and try to do what we feel is going to be, again, a win-win for everybody, the media, our staff, our students, as well as our parents and patrons.
Just clarity around, it happens in both of these policies under challenges of materials. We had talked about adding or staff. Was there, I got confused in the conversation, I guess.
So my initial thought when I said that, my question was how do staff, what's the process staff can challenge? That's
Right, for IF, remove it for IF.
Probably not.
No, keep it in for IF, but not IFA.
Is that what you're saying? Are you saying don't even add staff in either one? Or are you saying?
I would say not add staff to either one, as long as we get confirmation that there's going to be a process in the handbook.
I think I agree with that, Stockton. Any other comments? All right. Good, thank you. Moving on, what other comments, questions, suggestions on IFA?
I just have a question more than a comment.
Okay.
On the review committee, we have the building principal, the director of teaching and learning, or the assistant superintendent. Is the only or in any of this? What was the reasoning for? I'm just trying to figure out why that one was different.
I'm not sure why it's different. I would actually recommend against it because the assistant superintendent has a role in the process higher up.
Hmm.
And it may actually create a conflict, but that's something we can look closer at it.
Okay.
Because I think I'm actually one of the first contacts in the challenge process for. So if I've already been working on it and made some kind of, resolution with the parent that's not acceptable, coming back and being part of that committee, probably a conflict of interest at that point. It probably needs to be a different group looking at it. That would just be my thought.
Other comments? Suggestions? So just a quick review of what the edit or the changes, the suggestions I had is to add to the policy that parents and staff do have access to media center materials. 2 is to reference the handbook. 3 was to add and that the board be informed when a review committee is formed. And the 5th was to delete the or assistant superintendent, since they have other responsibilities. What other questions or suggestions or recommendations?
I think the only other thing was just defining what media materials. Did you say that?
I had definition of media
Okay.
center materials. Is
Okay.
that a part, is that in the policy or is that a part of the overall handbook that's being created?
It would more than likely, I think, have a definition within when we get the media center. When we start working on the media center handbook guidelines, but I will say at this time, I have nothing to really say what that would look, but we could definitely, I would think, spell that out, because that would be something because it is all encompassing, as Director Sinning alluded to, when you start thinking about. Again, I know I'm old, but what we considered at one time, was just pretty much instructional material was something that you could put your hand on. And nowadays, with so much as being digital, and digital is updated continuously, it's you have to really make sure that your definition is going to be, broad enough, but yet specific enough to where it pretty much gives the person that's looking at it some guidance on what level they're looking at.
So is that to add to the policy or to the handbook?
If it's added, I don't have a definition to add right now.
So we'll put the action on you to create a recommendation as to whether or not it belongs in the policy. If it does, to provide a recommended definition or include it as a part of the reference handbook through the referencing.
Yes, I can do that.
Okay. What other comments or
On,
suggestions?
on,
Uh-huh.
IFA, under the review committee,
Right?
lists everybody out, and then it says 2 patrons not employed by the district.
Mhm.
The other one, of course, is grade level parents. Patrons involves everybody, so are we gonna use parents for that particular school that the media's in, or?
I think when we were discussing it, the grade level parents on the instructional materials is because you're probably going to be
Right.
looking at something.
I get that.
A certain grade oriented, where the patrons, the media resources were a little bit broader. We did say not employed by the district because I think in the past we
Right.
talked about, there may be like the independent parent kind of kept out of the picture, not recently, but we're talking in the past.
Well, that's what I mean, is that parents? Because patrons, that's the whole, I mean, that's the tax base.
Parents are patrons.
I
Yeah, so it could
understand.
be parents, but it could also be maybe somebody from the community.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that, okay,
Because
It's a broader
the
term.
media was more broad
right.
representation.
Right.
And it could be.
Yeah, it's not excluding parents
Right, I was just.
Right.
Was that the goal is?
to broaden it out. Right.
Okay.
What, other suggestions or recommendations? Any final comments or thoughts? All right, hearing none, we do have an executive session this evening.
Mr. President, I move that the board recess to executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel matters of non-elected personnel to protect the privacy interests of an identifiable individual under coma. Those to be in session include Board of Education members, superintendent of schools, assistant superintendent of schools, school district attorney, and administrators as requested. The executive session will begin at 8:15 with an open meeting resuming no later than 9 PM in this place.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to move it to executive session for discussion of non-elected personnel under coma. Rachel, please collect the vote.
Mrs. Sealing,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Updike,
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Milius,
Yes.
Mr. Ewing,
Yes.
approved.
reconvene at 9. Do we need to go to the bathroom?
No later than.
No later than.
To no later than 9:30? I don't,
No later than, so we can go earlier.
I don't know that.
We'll make up a number then.
Okay, no later than 10 o'clock.
Second.
Moved and seconded to extend our executive session to no later than 10 o'clock. Rachel, please collect the vote.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Mr. Updike?
Yeah.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Milius,
Yes.
Mr. Ewing,
Yes.
Mrs. Sealing,
Yes.
approved.
I'll move to extend the executive session until no later than 10:30.
It's moved to second to extend executive session to no later than 10:30. Rachel, please collect the vote.
Mr. Updike,
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Sealing,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
approved.
Thank you, everyone.